The salt, laced air of Port Blossom, Oregon, had a way of seeping into things. It worked its way into the cedar shingles of the old fishing shacks, into the wool of your sweater, into the very marrow of your thoughts. For Liam Callahan, that air was the constant, a quiet companion in a life that felt increasingly like a blueprint for someone else's house. He stood in his workshop, a converted garage behind his small bungalow, the scent of sawdust and sea spray, a familiar perfume. The wide doors were rolled open, framing a rectangle of gray sky and the agitated, steel-colored surface of the Pacific a few hundred yards away. A fine mist, more atmosphere than rain, drifted in, settling on the smooth, pale surface of the basswood architectural model that occupied the center of his work table. It was a house, a beautiful house, all clean lines and sweeping glass, designed to cling to a cliffside just north of town like a modern, elegant barnacle. It was a testament to precision, to order, to the careful balance of stress and support. It was everything his life, at this particular moment, was not. The house belonged to Ethan. Or rather, it would belong to Ethan and Chloe, his best friend and his soon-to-be wife. The wedding was in 4 days. 4 days until Liam would stand beside Ethan, clad in a ridiculously expensive charcoal suit, and watch the two most important people in his life merge their futures into a single, cohesive structure. He was the best man, the chief support beam, and he felt a hairline fracture forming somewhere deep inside him. He ran a finger along the miniature deck of the model, a space designed for morning coffee and evening wine, for watching storms roll in, and for feeling infinitesimally small against the backdrop of the ocean. He'd poured hundreds of hours into this design, a wedding gift that felt more personal than any silver-wrapped kitchen appliance. It was his language, the only way he knew how to truly articulate his affection for Ethan, a friendship that had been the primary architecture of his own 32 years. They'd met in kindergarten, a bond forged over a shared Lego collection and a mutual distrust of nap time. They'd built forts in the woods behind their houses, navigated the treacherous currents of high school, and propped each other up through the bewildering maze of their 20s. Ethan was the engine, the one with the relentless forward momentum. He'd gone to business school, climbed the corporate ladder with an almost unnerving ease, and amassed the kind of casual wealth that allowed for cliffside houses and destination weddings. Liam was the anchor, the steady hand, the one who stayed. He'd studied architecture, come back to Port Blossom, and opened a small, respected firm that specialized in homes that looked as if they'd grown organically from the moody Oregon coast. Ethan conquered the world. Liam tried to make sense of a small piece of it. The phone on his workbench buzzed, rattling against a stray T-square. He glanced at the screen. Ethan. Of course. Callahan Architectural, Liam answered, his voice a low rumble. How may I design your life today? Ethan's laugh boomed through the speaker, energetic and unburdened. Just checking on the chief support beam. You're not getting cold feet, are you? It's not too late to elope to Vegas and have an Elvis impersonator do the honors. I hear he's available. Tempting, Liam said, a genuine smile touching his lips. It was impossible to stay morose around Ethan for long. His energy was infectious, a force of nature. But I think Chloe's mom might have my head if she doesn't get to see her color. Coordinated floral arrangements put to use. She's been planning this longer than you have. Don't I know it? I just got off a half-hour call about the exact shade of ivory for the napkins. Apparently, there's eggshell, cream, vanilla, and the tears of 1,000 virgins. We're going with vanilla, seemed safest. Liam chuckled, picturing Ethan, a man who navigated multi-million-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, being cornered by the formidable Martha, Chloe's mother, a woman who treated event planning with the strategic intensity of a military campaign. "How's Chloe holding up?" Liam asked, the question feeling more significant than he let on. "A little stressed, you know. The usual pre-wedding jitters. She's been quiet the last couple of days, just staring out at the ocean a lot. I think the sheer scale of it all is finally hitting her. But she's a rock. My rock. My rock." The words hung in the damp air of the workshop. Liam looked from the model house, so solid and certain, to the churning gray water beyond. He'd seen Chloe staring at that same ocean. He'd been at their rented beach house for a planning session the day before, and he'd found her standing on the deck, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze lost in the horizon. There was a difference between the quiet contemplation of a bride-to-be and the profound stillness of someone who had drifted far, far away. Her stillness had felt like the latter. When she'd finally noticed him, her smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. Her eyes, the color of sea glass, had looked haunted. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in," Liam said, his voice carefully neutral. "Listen, I'm putting the finishing touches on the model. I'll bring it by the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night, the big reveal. You're the best, man, seriously. I don't know what I'd do without you." The sincerity in Ethan's voice was a physical weight. It was the weight of 30 years of shared history, of secrets kept and favors done, of an unspoken pact of loyalty that was as fundamental to Liam's identity as his own name. "Gotta run. Another napkin crisis is brewing. See you tomorrow." The line went dead. Liam set the phone down, the silence of the workshop rushing back in, louder than before. He looked at the model house again. It was perfect. Strong foundation, elegant form, a seamless integration with its environment. It was everything a marriage should be. It was the life Ethan deserved, the life he had so meticulously built for himself. And Chloe was the final, most beautiful piece of the design. She was an artist, a painter. Her work was the opposite of Liam's, where he dealt in lines and angles and load-bearing capacities. She dealt in washes of color, in emotion, in the chaotic beauty of abstraction. Her canvases were vibrant and tumultuous, full of hidden depths and turbulent energy. He'd been captivated by her from the moment Ethan had introduced them 2 years ago. Not in a romantic way, not in a way that violated the sacred, unspoken code of friendship. It was a quieter, more profound fascination. He felt like he understood her language, the one she spoke with her brushes. He saw the melancholy in her blues, the flash of anger in her reds, the desperate hope in her slivers of gold. He sometimes felt he understood her paintings better than he understood the serene, smiling woman who stood beside his best friend. Ethan had met her at a gallery opening in Portland. He'd been instantly smitten, and he'd pursued her with the same single-minded determination he applied to everything in his life. Chloe, who had seemed so ethereal and independent, had, to Liam's surprise, been won over. On the surface, they were a perfect couple. The successful, charismatic businessman and the beautiful, talented artist. They complemented each other. He grounded her, Ethan would say. She brought color to his black and white world. Everyone said it. It was the narrative they had all agreed upon. But lately, Liam had started to notice the discrepancies. The way Chloe's hand would sometimes twitch in Ethan's, as if resisting an invisible restraint. The way her laughter would occasionally stop a fraction of a second too soon. The way she would retreat into herself at boisterous parties, her sea-glass eyes clouding over. He'd dismissed it as artistic temperament, as pre-wedding nerves, as his own tendency to overanalyze. He was a man who looked for stress fractures, after all. It was his job. He sighed, the sound lost in the rhythmic shushing of the distant surf. He picked up a miniature fir tree, no bigger than his thumb, and carefully glued it into place on the landscape surrounding the model house. He was just the architect, the best man, the chief support beam. His job was to make sure the structure was sound, to stand by and watch it be celebrated, to ensure everything went according to the plan. That was all. The following day, the sky broke, offering a rare glimpse of crystalline blue. The sun, a welcome stranger, glinted off the water, turning the waves from pewter to polished silver. It felt like a good omen, a benediction from the notoriously fickle Oregon weather gods. Liam spent the morning securing the model in a custom-built crate, his hands steady, his mind a little calmer in the light of day. The jitters he'd felt were just that, jitters, a transference of the bride and groom's own anxiety. He was projecting his own sense of being adrift onto Chloe. It was simpler that way. The rehearsal was scheduled for 5 o'clock at the Headlands, a stunning venue perched on a wind-swept bluff overlooking the ocean. The rehearsal dinner would follow at a rustic chic restaurant in town. Liam loaded the crated model into the back of his truck and drove towards the coast, the familiar road winding through dense forests of Douglas fir and Sitka spruce. He loved this drive, the way the trees would suddenly part to reveal a breathtaking vista of the ocean, a vast expanse of blue that made all human endeavors seem small and temporary. He arrived at the Headlands, to a scene of controlled chaos. Florists were unloading vans of white roses and eucalyptus, caterers were bustling about, and Martha, Chloe's mother, was directing traffic with a pearl-handled clipboard, her voice a crisp, commanding alto. Ethan was there, looking every bit the handsome, confident groom, a beacon of calm in the center of the storm. He clapped Liam on the back, his grin wide and genuine. "There he is, the man of the hour. Just kidding, that's me, but you're a close second." "Happy to play a supporting role," Liam said, his smile feeling more natural than it had the day before. The sunlight, the festive air, Ethan's uncomplicated happiness, it was all working its magic. He saw Chloe then. She was standing near the edge of the bluff, talking to her sister and maid of honor, a younger, bubblier version of herself, named Sarah. Chloe was wearing a simple white sundress, her dark hair pulled back from her face, the wind whipping stray strands around her. She looked beautiful, ethereal, a figure from a painting. When she turned and saw Liam, her polite smile faltered for a barest fraction of a second. He saw it again, that flicker of something haunted in her eyes, a shadow the bright sun couldn't erase. Then, it was gone, replaced by the serene mask of the happy bride. She walked over, her movements graceful. "Liam, hi." "Chloe, you look calm, considering," he said, gesturing to the whirlwind of activity around them. "The calm before the storm," she said, her voice soft. Her gaze drifted past him, out to the horizon. "It's a beautiful day for it. The weather gods are smiling on you. Or they're just lulling us into a false sense of security," she murmured, so quietly he wasn't sure he was meant to hear it. Before he could respond, Ethan had his arm around her, pulling her into a hug. "Isn't she amazing?" Ethan beamed, planting a kiss on her temple. Chloe's smile returned, but Liam noticed the way her shoulders tensed, just for a moment, under Ethan's embrace. The rehearsal itself was a strange, stilted affair. They walked through the motions, a dress rehearsal for a life, while the wedding planner, a woman with a headset and an inexhaustible supply of patience, guided them through their blocking. "And now, Liam, you'll hand the ring to Ethan. No, your other hand." "Perfect." Liam felt a sense of profound unreality, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. He stood in his designated spot, listened to the saccharine words of the officiant, and watched Ethan and Chloe stand together under a driftwood arch. The vast Pacific behind them. They looked perfect. A picture postcard of happiness. But a picture was just a surface, a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional reality. and Liam was starting to feel the unsettling depth of what lay beneath. Later that evening, the wedding party gathered at a restaurant called The Salty Dog. It was all reclaimed wood, Edison bulbs, and the low hum of happy chatter. The crated model of the house sat in a corner, waiting for its moment. Liam found himself seated between Sarah, Chloe's sister, and one of Ethan's cousins from out of town. The wine flowed freely, toasts were made, and embarrassing stories from Ethan and Liam's youth were recounted with great enthusiasm. Through it all, Liam felt a growing sense of unease. He watched Chloe at the head of the table, seated next to Ethan. She was playing her part beautifully. She laughed at the jokes, smiled at the compliments, and held Ethan's hand. But her eyes kept drifting towards the large window that looked out onto the darkening harbor. She looked like a ship that had slipped its moorings, silently drifting out into the night. After the main course, Ethan stood up, tapping his glass for attention. "All right, everyone. Before dessert, my best man, the incredibly talented and surprisingly punctual Liam Callahan, has a little something to share with us. Liam, the floor is yours." Liam took a deep breath and walked over to the crate. With a bit of theatrical flair, he and Ethan lifted the wooden top off, revealing the model house, bathed in the warm glow of the restaurant. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by applause. It was a damn good model. The tiny lights inside the house were even lit, casting a welcoming glow from the miniature windows. He gave a short speech, talking about his friendship with Ethan, about the honor of designing a home for him, a place where he and Chloe could build their future. His words felt hollow, a script he was reading from. He spoke of foundations and frameworks, of shelter and permanence, all the while feeling as if the ground were shifting beneath his own feet. Ethan was visibly moved, his eyes shining. He hugged Liam tightly. "It's perfect, man. It's everything. Thank you." Chloe came over, her face a pale oval in the dim light. She circled the model slowly, her artist's eye taking in every detail. "It's beautiful, Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She reached out and touched the miniature roof, her finger tracing the clean line of the gable. "You see everything so clearly." "It's what I do," he said. Her eyes met his, and for the first time that day, the mask was gone. He saw raw, unadulterated panic. It was a silent scream, a desperate plea that no one else in the room could hear. I need some air," she said abruptly, turning and walking towards the back door that led to a small patio overlooking the water. Martha started to rise, a concerned look on her face, but Ethan waved her down. "She's fine, just overwhelmed. It's been a long day," he said, his attention already diverted by an uncle who wanted to talk about property values. But Liam knew it wasn't that simple. He watched the door swing shut behind her. He stood there for a long moment, torn. His duty was here, in the warm, loud room, by his best friend's side. But some other instinct, a deeper, more troubling one, pulled him towards the cold, quiet night outside. He saw the stress fracture, and he couldn't ignore it. He had to know if the foundation was sound. He muttered an excuse to a nearby cousin and slipped out the same door. The air was cold, a shock after the warmth of the restaurant. The patio was small, just a few wooden planks and a railing. Chloe was standing at the edge, her back to him, staring down at the black water, where the lights of the fishing boats bobbed and swayed. The sound of the party inside was a muffled roar, a world away. "Chloe," he said softly. She flinched, startled, but didn't turn around. "You should go back in. They'll miss you." "They'll miss you more," he said, walking slowly to stand a few feet away from her, at the railing. He didn't look at her, but kept his gaze on the water. "Are you okay?" A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of the docks and the distant cry of a gull. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were gripping the cold metal of the railing, her knuckles white. "No," she finally whispered, the word so small it was almost stolen by the wind. "No, I'm not." He waited. He didn't push, didn't offer platitudes. He just waited, giving her the space to say whatever needed to be said. It was a skill he'd learned from years of listening to clients, of hearing the needs they couldn't quite articulate. She took a shuddering breath. "That house you built," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's so perfect. So thought out. Every piece has a purpose. It's strong and beautiful and honest. I'm glad you like it." She finally turned to face him, and in the dim light from the restaurant window, he could see that tears were silently streaming down her face. Her sea-glass eyes were stormy, shipwrecked. "That's the problem, Liam," she said, her voice breaking. "It's an honest house for a dishonest life, for a lie." The words hit him with a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. He felt the hairline fracture crack wide open, a seismic shock that threatened to bring the entire structure of his world tumbling down. "What? What are you talking about?" he managed to say, though he felt a cold dread creeping into his veins. He already knew. He'd known for weeks, maybe months. He just hadn't been willing to see it. She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching, desperate. "I can't do it, Liam," she whispered, the confession hanging in the cold, salt-laced air between them. "I can't marry him. I don't love him." The muffled sound of laughter from inside the restaurant felt like a mockery. Ethan was in there, celebrating the perfect future Liam had just presented to him in miniature, a future built on a foundation of lies. And Chloe was out here, in the dark, confessing the truth to the one person who had the power to either bury it or bring the whole beautiful, fraudulent structure crashing to the ground. She had just handed him the detonator, his best friend's happiness in one hand, a devastating truth in the other. The wind picked up, whipping off the harbor, cold and unforgiving. The wedding was in 3 days. Liam felt as though the wooden planks of the patio had dissolved beneath his feet, leaving him suspended over an abyss. Chloe's words echoed in the space between the party's muffled roar and the rhythmic slap of water against the pilings. "I don't love him." It was a simple sentence, yet it had the destructive power of a tectonic shift, rearranging the entire landscape of his life, of Ethan's life. His first instinct was denial, a desperate lurch towards self-preservation. "Chloe, you're nervous," he said, his voice sounding hollow and unconvincing even to his own ears. "It's wedding jitters. Everyone gets them. It's a huge commitment. It's normal to feel overwhelmed." He was reciting from a script, offering the kind of bland, reassuring lines a best man was supposed to offer. They were flimsy shields against the truth she had just unleashed. She shook her head, a slow, resolute movement. The tears had stopped, but her eyes were wide with a terrifying clarity. "No, it's not jitters. I've been telling myself that for months, Liam. I've been trying to believe it. I want to believe it. But it's not true." She wrapped her arms around herself, a fragile defense against the cold, or perhaps against the words she was finally speaking aloud. "I love Ethan, I do. But I'm not in love with him, and there's a difference. There's a whole world of difference, and I've been living in it, pretending I don't see the borders." He stared at her, his mind racing, trying to process the implications. Every shared laugh, every affectionate glance, every moment of their seemingly perfect courtship replayed in his head, now cast in a sinister, fraudulent light. He thought of Ethan's unshakable confidence, his deep, uncomplicated love for this woman. He thought of the house on the cliff, a monument to a future that was, apparently, a fiction. Why? The question was all he could manage. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because you're the only one who might understand, she said, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. You're his best friend. You're the architect. You see the structure of things. Everyone else, they just see the decorations. My mother sees a perfect wedding. My father sees a stable, successful son-in-law. And Ethan. Her voice broke again. Ethan sees the woman he's decided he's supposed to be with. He sees his plan. I'm a part of his plan. But he doesn't see me. Not really. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. But you do. Sometimes, I feel like you're the only one who does. The accusation, wrapped in a desperate compliment, landed like a punch to the gut. Had he been so obvious in his observations? Had his quiet fascination with her been that transparent? Guilt, sharp and hot, flooded him. He felt like a traitor, not for any action he had taken, but for the simple, silent act of seeing. Chloe, you have to tell him, he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. It was the only logical, ethical, decent thing to do. It was also the most catastrophic. I can't, she choked out, shaking her head violently. Liam, you don't understand. I've tried. 12 times, I've tried. I open my mouth, and the words just, they die. I see his face, so happy, so certain. I think about his parents, my parents, the hundreds of people flying in, the money, the expectations. It's like being caught in an avalanche. I can't breathe. I can't move. Hurting him would be like kicking out the foundations of a skyscraper. Everyone would be crushed in the fallout. It's easier to just let it happen, to just go through with it and hope that one day the love he has for me will be enough. That I can learn to be the person he thinks I am. Her logic was the logic of a prisoner, of someone so trapped by circumstance that a life sentence seems preferable to a messy, violent escape. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw past the beautiful bride. He saw a young woman about to willingly walk into a gilded cage, all because she was too terrified to admit she didn't belong there. And she was asking him, the best friend, the chief support beam, to help lock the door. That's not a life, Chloe, he said, his voice firm, edged with a harshness that surprised him. That's a performance, and it will destroy you. It will destroy both of you, eventually. A lie that big, it eats away at everything. It corrodes the foundation until one day, the whole thing collapses anyway. And it will be so much worse then. He was speaking from his own core principles, the architectural truths he lived by. A structure built on a flawed premise was doomed to fail. It was an inevitability. Then what do I do? She cried, her composure finally shattering completely. A sob escaped her, raw and ragged. Tell me what to do, Liam. Please. The wedding is in 3 days. Everyone is here. Everything is ready. It's too late. It's never too late to tell the truth, he said, though the words felt like a monumental hypocrisy. His own truth was that he was terrified. Terrified of losing his best friend, terrified of the chaos this would unleash, terrified of the role he was now being forced to play. The back door of the restaurant opened, spilling a rectangle of warm light and laughter onto the patio. Sarah, Chloe's sister, poked her head out. Chloe? Mom's asking for you. We're about to cut the cake. Her cheerful voice was a jarring intrusion from another universe, a universe where everything was still perfect. Chloe visibly composed herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hands, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She transformed back into the bride in a matter of seconds. It was a masterful, heartbreaking performance. I'll be right there, she called out, her voice miraculously steady. Sarah smiled and disappeared back inside. Chloe turned back to Liam, her eyes pleading. Don't say anything, please, not yet. Just, give me tonight. Give me one more day to think, to find the courage. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that waiting would only make it harder, that the lie was compounding with every passing second. But he saw the sheer terror in her face, and he couldn't bring himself to push her off the cliff. He was paralyzed by his loyalty to Ethan and his empathy for her. It was an impossible position. Okay, he heard himself say. Tonight. One day. But Chloe, you have to do this. You have to be the one to tell him. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. I will. I promise. She gave him one last, desperate look, then turned and walked back into the restaurant, back into the lie, leaving him alone in the cold darkness. Liam stood there for what felt like an eternity, the wind chilling him to the bone. He felt implicated, tainted. He was a co-conspirator now, a keeper of a secret that had the power to detonate his entire world. He looked down at the dark, churning water of the harbor and felt a sickening wave of vertigo. He was the architect who had just discovered a fatal flaw in the foundation of his most important project, just days before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. And he had just agreed to keep it a secret. He eventually forced himself to go back inside. The change in atmosphere was dizzying. The air was thick with warmth, laughter, and the scent of chocolate cake. Ethan saw him, and immediately pulled him into a one-armed hug. There you are. Where'd you go? You missed my dad's terrible joke about marriage being like a deck of cards. He was beaming, his face flushed with wine and happiness. He was completely, blissfully oblivious. The sight of it was like a knife in Liam's chest. Just needed some air, Liam mumbled. He saw Chloe standing by the cake, a knife in her hand, Ethan's hand over hers. They made the first cut together, a symbolic act of their shared future. The camera flashes were blinding. Everyone was smiling, applauding. Liam stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling like a ghost at the feast. He watched Chloe raise a forkful of cake to Ethan's lips, her own smile perfectly in place. It was the most convincing lie he had ever seen. And as he watched his best friend, the man he loved like a brother, swallow that bite of cake, a symbol of a promise he didn't know was already broken, Liam felt a profound, soul-deep sickness. He was complicit. The next 3 days would not be a countdown to a wedding. They would be a countdown to a detonation, and he was standing right at ground zero. The next day dawned heavy and gray, the sky a bruised purple that promised more rain. The festive blue of the previous day felt like a distant, mocking memory. Liam woke up on his couch, still in his clothes from the rehearsal dinner, with the bitter taste of cheap wine and expensive secrets in his mouth. He hadn't been able to face his own bed. Sleep had been a shallow, restless affair, punctuated by nightmarish loops of Chloe's tear-streaked face and Ethan's trusting smile. He dragged himself into the kitchen and made coffee, the familiar ritual doing little to soothe the frantic, buzzing anxiety in his chest. He was a keeper of the secret now. Chloe's plea for one more day had bought her time, but it had bought him a special kind of hell. Every text message, every phone call, every interaction would be filtered through the lens of this catastrophic knowledge. His phone buzzed on the counter. A group text from Ethan to the groomsmen. Ethan, 10 a.m., O'Malley's pub. Pre-wedding, pre-bachelor party pint. Don't be late, Callahan. Liam stared at the message. O'Malley's. Their place. The dim, wood-paneled pub where they'd celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and dissected life for the better part of a decade. The thought of sitting there, across from Ethan, sharing a beer and pretending that everything was fine, felt like an act of profound betrayal. But not going was not an option. It would raise questions, and questions were the last thing he needed. He arrived at 10:15, cultivating a believable air of being slightly hungover and rushed. The other groomsmen were already there, Ethan's 2 brothers and a college friend, all of them loud, cheerful, and blissfully unaware. Ethan was holding court at their usual booth in the corner, a pint of stout in his hand, looking relaxed and happier than Liam had ever seen him. "Look what the cat dragged in," Ethan boomed, sliding over to make room. "Rough night, Callahan? You look like you wrestled a badger and lost." "Something like that," Liam said, forcing a weak smile as he sat down. He ordered a coffee he didn't want. The conversation was a blur of wedding logistics and crude jokes. They talked about the bachelor party planned for that night, a low-key affair involving poker and whiskey at a rented cabin, a concession to Chloe's distaste for anything involving strip clubs. Liam nodded and laughed in all the right places, but his mind was elsewhere. He was watching Ethan, studying him. He saw the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned Chloe's name, the easy confidence in his posture, the absolute certainty he radiated. This wasn't just a man getting married. This was a man who believed he had achieved the pinnacle of his life's plan. And Liam knew the plan was a lie. The guilt was a physical thing, a sour knot in his stomach. "So, I was talking to Chloe this morning," Ethan said, turning to Liam and lowering his voice, creating a bubble of intimacy amidst the boisterous group. "She seemed a lot better, more relaxed. She said she was glad she got some air last night, said she had a good talk." He looked at Liam expectantly. "With you, I'm guessing?" Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. Yeah, a little bit. Just told her it was normal to be overwhelmed. You know, best man duties." "Knew I could count on you," Ethan said, clapping him on the shoulder. The casual, trusting gesture felt like a brand. "She's been so tense lately. I think she just needed to hear from someone on the outside that it's all going to be okay." He took a long drink of his beer. "She loves that house model, by the way. She couldn't stop talking about it. Said you see things clearly. High praise from an artist, right?" "Right," Liam croaked, the coffee turning to acid in his stomach. Every word of praise from Ethan was another twist of the knife. He wasn't seeing things clearly. He was an accessory to a grand deception. The day crawled by, in a state of suspended animation. Liam spent the afternoon at his workshop, unable to work, just staring at the empty space on the table where the model had been. He kept checking his phone, waiting for a call or a text from Chloe. I told him. 3 simple words. That's all he needed. But the phone remained silent. With every passing hour, the knot of dread in his gut tightened. What if she couldn't do it? What if her courage failed her? What if she was planning to go through with it after all, hoping he would keep her secret forever? The thought was unbearable. He would not, could not, stand on that altar next to Ethan, knowing what he knew. His loyalty had a limit, and that limit was the active participation in a lie that would ruin his friend's life. By late afternoon, with still no word from Chloe, Liam knew he couldn't wait any longer. He was a participant in this, whether he liked it or not. He had to act. He drove to the sprawling beach house the wedding party had rented, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The house was a flurry of activity, family members arriving, bridesmaids bustling with garment bags, the air thick with perfume and hairspray. He found Sarah, Chloe's sister, in the kitchen, arranging a platter of cheese. "Hey, Sarah, is Chloe around?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Upstairs, getting her hair and makeup trial done," Sarah said cheerfully. "You want me to get her?" "No, that's okay. I'll just wait." He couldn't interrupt a makeup trial to ask if she'd detonated her life yet. The absurdity of it all was nauseating. He lingered, making small talk with relatives, feeling like an imposter. Finally, he saw Chloe emerge at the top of the stairs. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her face artfully made up. She looked, for all the world, like a radiant, happy bride. When her eyes met Liam's across the crowded room, he saw the same familiar panic. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She hadn't told him. His blood ran cold. She was going to go through with it. She was going to walk down that aisle. The promise she'd made him on the pier was empty. She had used him, used his silence to buy herself another day of denial. Anger, cold and sharp, cut through his anxiety. Anger at Chloe for her weakness, for putting him in this impossible position. And anger at himself for his naive complicity. He pushed his way through the crowd and met her at the bottom of the stairs. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent, grabbing her elbow. He pulled her through the house and out onto the wide, wind-swept deck, away from the prying eyes and ears of the party. The sky was dark now, the sea, a churning, angry, gray. "You didn't tell him," he said. It wasn't a question. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the railing, at the sea, at anything but him. "I couldn't, Liam. I tried. I really did." But he was so happy. He was talking about our honeymoon, about the kids we're going to have. He has our whole life planned out. It's all so perfect. How can I destroy that? How can I be the person who rips that all away from him? Because it isn't real. Liam's voice rose, louder than he intended. "It's a fantasy, Chloe, and you're casting him as the lead in a play without telling him the third act is a tragedy. It's not fair to him. It's cruel. And telling him the day before his wedding isn't cruel?" She shot back, her eyes finally flashing with a desperate fire. "Humiliating him in front of his entire family? What's the kinder option here, Liam? There are no good choices. There's the truth, and there's a lie." "It's that simple," he said, though he knew it wasn't. "If you don't tell him, I will." The threat hung in the air between them, ugly and absolute. He saw the flicker of betrayal in her eyes, the horror of being cornered. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "He's your best friend." "That's exactly why I have to," he said, his heart aching. "I can't stand by and watch him marry someone who doesn't love him. I can't watch him build a life on a lie. I won't be a part of it." He had drawn a line in the sand. He had given her an ultimatum. He could see the struggle on her face, the war between her fear and her conscience. For a moment, he thought she might break, that she might finally find the strength to do what needed to be done. But then, the sliding glass door opened. It was Ethan. He stepped out onto the deck, a broad smile on his face. He didn't seem to notice the tension, the charged silence between them. "There you two are," he said, sliding his arm around Chloe's waist and pulling her against him. "Sneaking off for a secret conference? Planning a surprise for me?" He looked from Liam's grim face to Chloe's pale one. For the first time, a flicker of concern crossed his features. "Hey, is everything okay?" Liam's heart stopped. This was it, the moment of truth. He looked at Chloe, willing her to speak, to say the words, to end the charade. Tell him now." Chloe opened her mouth. She took a breath. She looked at Ethan's loving, trusting face, and she crumbled. "Everything's perfect," she said, forcing a brilliant, brittle smile. She reached up and kissed him. "Liam was just telling me how beautiful my hair looks. Weren't you, Liam?" The world tilted on its axis. She had done it. She had thrown him under the bus, used him as a prop in her play, and sealed her decision. She was choosing the lie. Ethan beamed, relieved. "Well, he's right. You look incredible." He turned to Liam. "Poker. Cabin. 1 hour. Don't be late." He gave Chloe another kiss and went back inside, oblivious. Liam and Chloe stood in silence, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore like a funeral dirge. He felt a profound sense of disappointment, so sharp, it was almost a physical pain. So that's it? he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. You're just going through with it. I don't have a choice, she whispered, her eyes pleading with him to understand. You always have a choice, Chloe, he said, his voice cold. You've just made yours. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the deck. He walked through the house, past the smiling faces and the happy chatter, a man walking to his own execution. He knew what he had to do. Chloe had failed the test. She had abdicated her responsibility, and in doing so she had transferred the full, crushing weight of it onto him. He got in his truck and drove, not towards the cabin for the bachelor party, but towards town. He drove to O'Malley's. He knew Ethan would make one last stop there to pick up a case of beer for the party. He had to do it now, before he lost his nerve. He had to destroy his best friend's happiness in order to save him. He sat in the empty pub, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him, and waited. 10 minutes later, Ethan walked in, whistling. His face broke into a grin when he saw Liam. Couldn't wait for the party to start, huh? I like your style. He strode to the bar, ordered the beer, and then came over to the booth. You okay, man? You've been weird all day. Liam looked up at his best friend, the friend he had known his entire life, the friend whose face was as familiar to him as his own. He saw the open, honest affection in Ethan's eyes, and he prepared to break his heart. We need to talk, Liam said, his voice rough. It's about Chloe. The smile on Ethan's face faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. What about her? Liam took a deep breath, the air burning in his lungs. He looked his best friend in the eye, and then he told him the truth. He told him everything. He relayed the conversation on the patio, the tears, the confession. He uttered the 4 simple, devastating words that Chloe couldn't bring herself to say. Ethan, she doesn't love you. The silence that followed was the most profound silence Liam had ever known. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the warmth, all the life out of the room. Ethan just stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. The jovial, confident man from moments before was gone, replaced by a stranger with haunted eyes. What? Ethan whispered, the word a puff of air. What did you say? She told me, Liam said, his own voice cracking. He felt like a monster, a butcher. Last night. She's not in love with you. She's terrified of hurting you, but she's going to go through with it because she's too scared to stop it. Ethan shook his head, a slow, jerky motion, as if trying to dislodge a thought that was too painful to hold. No, you're lying. You're mistaken. It's jitters. You said so yourself. She's just nervous. It's not jitters, Ethan, Liam said gently, his heart shattering for his friend. I saw her face. I heard her voice. It's the truth. Ethan's disbelief began to curdle, twisting into something else. Something dark and ugly. Suspicion. Why you? He spat, his voice low and venomous. Why would she tell you, my best man? Unless... His eyes narrowed, searching Liam's face, reinterpreting every shared glance, every quiet conversation he'd ever witnessed between Liam and Chloe. Unless there's something more, something you're not telling me. What? No, Ethan, it's not like that at all, Liam said, horrified. She came to me because I'm your friend. Because she was lost and she thought I could help. Help? Ethan's laugh was a harsh, broken sound. You call this helping? You're destroying my life. 2 days before my wedding, you come in here and you tell me the woman I love, the woman I'm about to marry, doesn't love me back? And I'm supposed to just believe you? I'm telling you because I'm your friend, Liam insisted, his voice rising. Because I would rather you hate me for telling you the truth than watch you live a lie. I am trying to protect you. Protect me? Ethan stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He was trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. "You've wanted this, haven't you? You've always been jealous. Jealous of my job, jealous of my money, and now you're jealous of her." He pointed a shaking finger at Liam. "You want her for yourself. That's what this is. You saw your chance, and you took it. You poisoned her against me." The accusation was so monstrous, so far from the truth, that it left Liam speechless. He could only stare, his own pain and guilt momentarily eclipsed by the shock of Ethan's words. He had expected anger, devastation, heartbreak. He had not expected this. He had not expected to be cast as the villain, the serpent in his own best friend's garden. "That's not true, Ethan, and you know it," Liam finally managed to say, his voice shaking. "I don't know anything anymore," Ethan snarled. "Except that my best friend just stabbed me in the back." His face was a twisted mask of fury and pain. "Get out. Get out of my sight. I don't ever want to see you again." He turned, not waiting for a response, and strode out of the pub, leaving the case of beer sitting on the bar. The door swung shut behind him, plunging the room back into silence. Liam sat alone in the booth, the untouched whiskey glass in front of him. The world had cracked open, and he had fallen through. In the space of 5 minutes, he had lost the single most important friendship of his life. He had done the right thing, the only thing he could do, and it had cost him everything. He put his head in his hands, the smell of old wood and stale beer filling his senses. The silence of the pub was deafening. Outside, the rain began to fall, streaking down the windows like tears. The storm had finally broken, and the devastation was absolute. The days that followed were a blur of hollow, silent hours. The world didn't end, it just became gray and muffled, as if Liam were living at the bottom of the sea. The wedding, of course, did not happen. He heard about it in fragments, through the reluctant, pitying murmurings of the small town. He heard that Ethan had confronted Chloe that night, that there had been a terrible, final argument. He heard that the out-of-town guests had been sent home with quiet, terse apologies. He heard that Chloe had packed her car and driven away in the middle of the night, leaving a note for her parents. She had simply vanished. And Ethan had holed up in his parents' house, refusing to see or speak to anyone, especially not Liam. Liam became a pariah. In a small town like Port Blossom, a story like that travels fast, and it mutates with every telling. The narrative that took hold was the one Ethan had crafted in his rage, that Liam, the jealous friend, had coveted Chloe and sabotaged the wedding to get her for himself. It was a simple, ugly story, and people found it easier to believe than the messy, complicated truth. He saw it in the averted eyes of people he'd known his whole life at the grocery store, in the sudden silence when he walked into the local coffee shop. He was no longer Liam Callahan, the quiet architect. He was the man who had destroyed the town's golden couple, the best man who had betrayed the groom. He tried to reach out to Ethan. He called, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He sent long, rambling texts, trying to explain, to apologize for the pain, to reaffirm a friendship that felt like a phantom limb. The messages remained unanswered, marked with the cold, final blue check of red. He even went to Ethan's parents' house once. Ethan's father, a man who had always treated Liam like a second son, met him at the door, his face a grim, stony mask. "He doesn't want to see you, Liam," he'd said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Maybe it's best if you just stay away for a while." The door had closed quietly in his face. A while. It felt like a life sentence. His work became his only refuge. He retreated to his workshop, the scent of sawdust and the precision of his tools, a small comfort in a world that had lost all its structure. He threw himself into his projects with a frantic, desperate energy. He designed houses for other people, creating spaces for families to build their lives, all while his own life lay in ruins. He worked late into the night, until his hands ached and his eyes burned, anything to keep the silence and the memories at bay. But in the quiet moments, it all came rushing back. Chloe's desperate face in the dim light of the patio, the raw hatred in Ethan's eyes at the pub, the sound of the door closing on 30 years of friendship. He was haunted by a rotating cast of guilts. Guilt for his part in Chloe's pain, for pushing her into a confrontation she wasn't ready for. Guilt for the devastation he had wrought upon Ethan's life, for being the messenger who was shot, and deservedly so. But underneath it all, there was a deeper, more insidious guilt. The guilt of what Ethan had accused him of. Had he been jealous? On some subconscious level, had he wanted Chloe? He replayed every interaction, every conversation, searching for a seed of betrayal. He had admired her, yes. He had felt a connection to her, a sense of understanding. But had it been more? The accusation, once planted, had taken root, and he found himself questioning his own motives, his own heart. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. The seasons turned. Summer bled into a damp, melancholic autumn. The tourists left, and Port Blossom settled into its quiet, gray winter slumber. The talk about the wedding faded, replaced by more immediate town gossip. Liam's isolation became a kind of routine. He worked, he ate, he slept. He walked the empty beaches, the relentless crash of the waves, a fitting soundtrack to the turmoil in his own head. The ocean, in its vast, indifferent power, was a comfort. It didn't judge, it just was. One cold afternoon in late November, he was walking on his usual stretch of sand, a lonely strip of beach just south of town. The sky was the color of lead, the wind sharp and biting. He saw a figure in the distance, walking towards him. As they drew closer, he realized it was Ethan's mother, Claire. His heart seized up. He hadn't spoken to her since before the wedding. He thought about turning back, but it was too late. She had seen him. She was a kind, gentle woman who had always had a soft spot for Liam. As she approached, he could see the sadness etched into the lines around her eyes. "Liam," she said, her voice soft. "Claire," he said, his own voice hoarse. How are you?" "We're managing," she said, which was her way of saying things were not good. "I was hoping I might run into you. I know Ethan. I know he told you to stay away. But he's not himself." They stood there for a moment, in an awkward silence, the wind whipping around them. "How is he?" Liam asked, the question he'd been wanting to ask for months. She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the whole gray sky. "He's broken, Liam. He quit his job. He sold his condo in the city. He's just drifting. He's full of so much anger. At you, at Chloe, at himself. It's eating him alive." She looked out at the churning water. "He won't talk about it. Not really. But I know he misses you. In all his anger, I know that's the part that hurts him the most. He didn't just lose a fiancé. He lost his brother." The words were a small, painful gift, a sliver of hope in a desolate landscape. "I miss him too," Liam said, the admission tearing at his throat. "I never wanted to hurt him. I couldn't let him make that mistake." "I know," she said, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm and maternal. "You were a good friend, Liam, a true friend. It's a hard thing, to tell a truth that you know will cause so much pain. Most people wouldn't have the courage." She gave his arm a squeeze. "Give him time. The anger will burn itself out eventually. And when it does, he's going to need his best friend." They parted ways, and as Liam walked back towards his bungalow, he felt the first crack in the ice, that had encased his heart for months. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding, and it was enough to let a little bit of light in. He thought of Chloe, wondering where she had gone, what had become of her. He hoped she had found some measure of peace, that the sacrifice of her old life had led her to a more honest one. He didn't think of her with longing, or with any of the romantic projection Ethan had accused him of. He thought of her with a quiet, somber empathy. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, cast away on different, lonely islands. Winter settled in, long and dark. Liam continued to work. He took on a new project, a small community library for a neighboring town. It was a humble, public building, the opposite of the grand, private statement of the cliffside house. He poured himself into it. He designed reading nooks and spaces for children, a place for quiet contemplation and shared knowledge. He found a sense of purpose in it, a way to build something that brought people together, instead of tearing them apart. One evening, he was working late in his workshop, sketching plans for the library. The rain was lashing against the windows. He found an old box of photos while looking for a specific ruler. He sat on the floor and opened it. It was full of pictures of him and Ethan, as kids with missing teeth and scraped knees, as teenagers with bad haircuts and ill-fitting suits at a school dance, as young men on a backpacking trip, grinning at the camera, the whole world in front of them. He traced the outline of Ethan's smiling face in a photo of them on graduation day. The loss felt as fresh and raw as it had that night in the pub. He realized then that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, like building. You had to clear the wreckage first. You had to survey the damaged foundation. And then, slowly, piece by piece, you had to start building again. He didn't know what the new structure would look like. He didn't know if it would ever include Ethan again. All he knew was that he had to keep laying one brick, then the next, in the hope that he could one day build a life that felt solid and true again. He packed the photos away, stood up, and went back to his drafting table. He picked up his pencil and drew a clean, straight line. It was a start. Another year slipped by, measured in the changing moods of the Pacific. The gray of winter gave way to the tentative green of spring, which exploded into the vibrant, tourist-filled summer before mellowing into the crisp, golden melancholy of autumn. Liam's life found a new, quieter rhythm. The community library was completed, and the town celebrated its opening. Seeing children curled up in the reading nooks he had designed brought him a satisfaction so deep and pure, it almost made him ache. His firm was thriving, his reputation for thoughtful, site-specific design growing along the coast. The ghost of the scandal had faded. He was no longer the pariah, just Liam Callahan again, the quiet architect who kept to himself. He still hadn't spoken to Ethan. The silence between them had become a solid, impenetrable wall. He heard through the grapevine of Claire's occasional, gentle updates that Ethan had taken a job with a non-profit in Portland, something to do with sustainable development. It was a world away from the cutthroat corporate ladder he had been so eager to climb. It seemed the shipwreck had changed his course as well. Liam held on to that knowledge, a small, secret hope that his friend was finding a new, more meaningful way to navigate the world. The pain of the lost friendship had dulled from a sharp, open wound to a chronic, phantom ache. It was always there, a hollow space in his life where 30 years of shared history used to be. He missed the easy camaraderie, the shorthand language of a lifelong bond, the simple comfort of knowing there was someone in the world who knew him better than anyone else. He had other friends, acquaintances, but nothing could fill the void Ethan had left. He had thought of Chloe, too, in fleeting, abstract moments. He wondered if she was painting, if she was happy, if she had managed to build an honest life from the wreckage of the old one. He never tried to find her. Their connection was forged in trauma, and he felt that to seek her out would be to reopen a wound that was best left to scar over. They were bound by a shared secret and a shared loss, and he accepted that their story was finished. One crisp October afternoon, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was for a gallery opening in Portland. The artist's name was unfamiliar, but the gallery owner was a mutual acquaintance, someone on the periphery of his and Ethan's old social circle. On a whim, feeling a rare urge to break from his monastic routine, he decided to go. He told himself he needed to get out, to see some art, to feel like a part of the world again. The gallery was in the Pearl District, a chic, industrial space with high ceilings and polished concrete floors. It was crowded, a mix of artists, collectors, and the city's fashionable elite. Liam felt out of place in his simple wool jacket, a man from a small, quiet town adrift in a sea of urban cool. He got a glass of wine and began to wander through the exhibit. The paintings were large, abstract canvases, full of bold, slashing strokes and deep, moody colors. They were powerful, chaotic, and yet held a strange, compelling harmony. They spoke of turmoil, of loss, of a painful, hard-won beauty. Liam was drawn to one in particular. It was a vast seascape, but not a realistic one. It was the feeling of the ocean, a maelstrom of deep indigos, angry grays, and churning whites. But in the very center, there was a single, defiant slash of brilliant, hopeful gold. It was like looking at a visual representation of the last 2 years of his life. He stood in front of it for a long time, lost in its depths. "It's called The Calm After," a soft voice said beside him. He knew that voice. His heart did a slow, painful somersault in his chest. He turned. It was Chloe. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, cut in a stylish, no-nonsense bob. She wore a simple black dress, her hands smudged with what looked like faint traces of paint. She was thinner, and the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, weary strength. She was no longer the ethereal, trapped fiancée. She was herself. "Chloe," he breathed, his own voice sounding strange and distant. "Liam." She gave him a small, tentative smile. I didn't know if you'd come." He was confused. He looked from her to the paintings, then back to her face. He glanced at the small placard next to the seascape. "The Calm After, C. Dubois. Chloe Dubois." It was her show. This is all you," he said, a wave of understanding and awe washing over him. She nodded. "This is what I've been doing for the last 2 years, trying to make sense of it all." Her gaze followed his back to the painting. "That one's about. Well, you know what it's about." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, 2 veterans of a war only they understood. The noisy chatter of the gallery faded into the background. "You look good, Chloe," he said, and he meant it. "You look strong." "I'm getting there," she said. "It hasn't been easy. I moved to the city, got a tiny studio, painted like a maniac. It was the only way I could process everything, get it out of me." She looked at him, her sea-glass eyes clear and direct. "I'm sorry, Liam, for what I put you through. It was cowardly of me. I put you in an impossible position, and I felt guilty about it every single day." "We both did what we thought was right," he said, surprised by the ease with which the words came. The anger and disappointment he had felt towards her had long since evaporated, leaving only a quiet empathy. "How did you know I'd be here?" "I asked the gallery owner to send you an invitation. I hoped you would come. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" He was genuinely shocked. "I blew up your life." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You saved it. You had the courage to do what I couldn't. You told the truth. It was a terrible, painful, necessary truth. If you hadn't done it, I'd be I'd be living in that beautiful, empty house on the cliff, a ghost in my own life. You set me free. It was a brutal kind of freedom, but it was real. Her words were a balm on a wound he hadn't realized was still so tender. He had carried the weight of being the destroyer for so long, he had never considered the possibility that he had also been a liberator. I lost my best friend, he said, the words coming out as a quiet, painful admission. Chloe's face softened with a deep, shared sadness. I know, and I'm so sorry for that. That's the part that I can't forgive myself for. The damage I did to your friendship, that was my fault. The gallery owner came over then, pulling Chloe away to introduce her to a potential buyer. Don't go, she mouthed to Liam over the woman's shoulder. He stayed. He wandered through the rest of the gallery, seeing the narrative of her healing in the progression of the paintings. The early ones were dark, violent, and full of despair. The later ones, like the seascape, still held the memory of the storm, but they were infused with a sense of light, of peace, of acceptance. He was looking at her soul, laid bare on canvas. And he understood. When the crowd began to thin, she found him again. Can I buy you a coffee? She asked. Or something stronger? I feel like we have about 2 years of conversation to catch up on. They left the gallery and walked to a quiet, dimly lit bar around the corner. They sat in a booth, the noise of the city a distant hum. The awkwardness he had feared was absent. In its place was a strange, sober intimacy. They were two people who had seen the absolute worst of each other, who had been through a shared trauma and had come out the other side. There were no pretenses left. They talked for hours. She told him about her escape from Port Blossom, the first few lonely, terrifying months in the city, the struggle to find her voice as an artist again. She spoke of the guilt and the shame, but also of the slow, dawning realization that she had made the right choice, however painful. He told her about his year of isolation, about the town turning against him, about the wall of silence from Ethan. He told her about the library project, about finding a way to build again. He found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone, about the hollow ache of his lost friendship, about the way he sometimes felt like a ghost in his own hometown. She listened with a profound, compassionate attention. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just listened, her sea-glass eyes holding his, and he felt a sense of being seen, truly seen, that was both unnerving and deeply comforting. Heard he's working for a non-profit now, she said softly, testing the waters. Liam nodded. Sustainable development. I think the implosion of his perfect, 5-year plan might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. I just wish it didn't have to hurt so much. Sometimes the things that save us are the things that hurt the most, she said, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were resting on the table. He noticed the paint under her fingernails, the calluses on her fingers. They were the hands of a worker, a creator. As the night wore on, the conversation shifted from the past to the present. He asked her about her painting, and she lit up, describing her process, her inspirations, the way she saw the world in color and light. He told her about his architecture, about his belief that a well-designed space could shape a person's life, could bring them peace and clarity. They were talking about their work, but they were also talking about themselves, about the core of who they were. They were speaking the same language, a language of structure and chaos, of form and feeling. For the first time since that terrible night, he wasn't looking at her as Ethan's fiancée, or as the woman whose secret had upended his life. He was seeing Chloe Dubois, the artist. A woman of incredible strength, resilience, and a quiet, formidable talent. And he realized, with a jolt that had nothing to do with the whiskey he was drinking, that he was drawn to her. Not out of guilt or shared history, but as the man he was now, to the woman she had become. It was a tentative, fragile feeling, like the first sketch of a new design. As they got up to leave, standing on the rain-slicked sidewalk under the amber glow of a street lamp, an awkward silence fell between them. The night was over. The past had been excavated and examined. The future was an unwritten page. "Well," he said, his hands in his pockets. It was really good to see you, Chloe. Your work is incredible." "It was good to see you too, Liam," she said. "Thank you for coming, and for everything." She looked as if she wanted to say more. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear that this was it, that they would say their goodbyes and retreat back to their separate, scarred lives. The thought was unexpectedly unbearable. I have a project I'm working on," he heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "A renovation of an old cannery on the coast, turning it into artist lofts. I've been struggling with the common spaces. How to make them feel creative, inspiring." He took a breath. Maybe I could hire you as a consultant to talk about color, texture, art." It was a clumsy, transparent excuse, but it was all he had. Chloe looked at him, and for the first time that night, a genuine, unguarded smile spread across her face. It was like seeing the sun break through the clouds. "I think," she said softly, "that I would like that very much." She reached out and touched his arm, a brief, warm gesture. "Call me, Liam." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the Portland night. Liam stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the light rain beginning to fall again. But this time, it didn't feel like tears. It felt like a cleansing. The wall between him and Ethan was still there, a monument to a painful past. But a door had just opened, a door he never expected to find, leading to a future he couldn't have possibly designed. The first consultation was stilted, professional. Liam drove up to Portland, and they met at a coffee shop, his blueprints spread across the small table between them. He pointed to the spaces on the plans, the lobby, the shared hallways, the rooftop garden, and talked about flow and function and building codes. She listened intently, then spoke about sightlines, about how a certain color could evoke a feeling of calm or energy, how the placement of a single piece of art could transform a sterile corridor into a place of connection. They were both hiding behind the comfortable shield of their work, two professionals engaged in a transaction. But underneath the technical jargon, something else was happening. They were learning each other's language, finding the points where his world of structure and her world of chaos intersected. The second meeting was easier. He brought her down to Port Blossom to see the old cannery itself. It was a cavernous, derelict building on the industrial side of the harbor, smelling of rust and brine and forgotten history. As they walked through the vast, empty spaces, their footsteps echoing in the silence, the professional pretense began to melt away. Chloe's eyes lit up as she saw the potential, the raw beauty in the decay. She ran her hand over a crumbling brick wall, looked up at the massive timber beams crisscrossing the ceiling, and saw not a ruin, but a canvas. "You can't paint over this brick, Liam," she said, her voice full of passion. "You have to seal it, preserve it. The history is part of the art." He watched her, captivated by the way she saw the world. He had seen a structural problem. She saw a story. They spent hours there, their conversation weaving seamlessly from the project to their own lives. They stood on the roof, looking out over the harbor, the same harbor they had stood beside on that terrible night 2 years ago. But the view was different now. The water didn't look menacing. It looked calm, full of possibility. The past was there, a shadow in the corner of their vision, but they were finally looking forward. Their meetings became more frequent, the excuse of the cannery project wearing thinner each time until it became a shared, unspoken joke. Sometimes he drove to Portland, Sometimes she drove down to the coast. They explored her city, visiting galleries and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. She showed him her studio, a messy, paint-spattered sanctuary where he felt he could see the unfiltered truth of who she was. He, in turn, showed her his Port Blossom, not the town of painful memories, but his town. He took her to his favorite secluded beaches, to the trails that wound through the coastal forests, to the quiet spots where he went to think. He showed her his workshop, the place where he ordered the world into clean, manageable lines. She touched the models of his houses with a gentle reverence, understanding the care and thought that went into every tiny detail. They were orbiting each other, slowly, cautiously, like two celestial bodies afraid of the gravitational pull between them. The ghost of Ethan was always there, an invisible third party in their burgeoning relationship. They never spoke his name, but his presence was felt in their hesitations, in the careful boundaries they maintained. A hand that stopped just short of touching, a compliment that was held back at the last second. They were both so afraid of this new, fragile thing being a betrayal. One evening, they were walking on the beach near Liam's bungalow. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink that Chloe would have loved to capture on canvas. They had been talking for hours, about everything and nothing. "I don't know what this is, Liam," Chloe said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. She stopped walking and turned to face him, the sea breeze catching her hair. "I don't either," he admitted, his heart thudding in his chest. "I just know that when I'm with you, I feel less alone. I feel understood." "Me too," she whispered. "But I'm scared. I feel like we don't have the right. Like our happiness would be built on the foundation of his pain." It was the first time either of them had voiced the fear that lay between them. The guilt was a shared burden. "I know," he said. He looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon. "But we're not the same people we were 2 years ago. That pain, it changed us. It broke us down, but it made us who we are now. And the man I am now is standing on a beach with a woman I'm starting to care about very much. Is that a betrayal, or is it just life?" He turned back to her. The last light of the sunset was reflected in her eyes. He saw his own uncertainty, his own hope, mirrored there. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before he gently cupped her cheek. Her skin was cool from the sea air. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. In that moment, the fear receded, replaced by a sense of profound, terrifying rightness. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of recognition, of shared survival. It was quiet, tender, and full of all the unspoken words of the past 2 years. It was a promise not to forget the storm, but to finally accept the calm that had followed. When they broke apart, the sky had deepened to purple. They didn't speak. They just stood there, his hand still on her cheek, her hand covering his, the sound of the waves washing the shore. They had crossed a line, and they both knew there was no going back. The cannery project was no longer an excuse, it was a metaphor. They were taking something old and broken, something with a painful history, and they were building something new and beautiful inside of it. Not by erasing the past, but by honoring it. Their relationship unfolded slowly, deliberately, like one of Liam's designs. They built it carefully, with a deep awareness of the fragile ground they stood on. They were two people who understood the devastating consequences of a flawed foundation, and they were determined to get this right. Their love wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a quiet, steady construction, built of shared vulnerability, deep respect, and a hard-won understanding of what it meant to be honest, with oneself and with each other. Chloe eventually moved her studio to one of the newly completed lofts in the cannery. Her presence in Port Blossom was a quiet statement. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was claiming her right to be there, to build a life in the town that had once been the site of her greatest unhappiness. Liam's bungalow, once a solitary refuge, became a shared home. The silence was filled with her laughter, the smell of turpentine mingling with the scent of sawdust from his workshop. He would watch her paint, mesmerized by the way she could translate emotion into color. She would look over his blueprints, understanding the poetry in his precise lines. They were two halves of a whole, structure and spirit, finding a perfect, unlikely balance. But the shadow remained, the unaddressed past, the broken friendship. Liam knew, and Chloe understood, that he could not fully give himself to this new future, while the biggest piece of his past was still shattered. The wall of silence between him and Ethan was a structural flaw in his own happiness. He had to face it. He had to try to tear it down, even if all he found on the other side was more pain and rejection. He didn't tell Chloe what he was going to do. He didn't want to burden her with the anxiety of it. One Saturday morning, he simply got in his truck and drove the 2 hours to Portland, to the address he had for Ethan's nonprofit. It was a small, unassuming office in a converted warehouse. Liam's hands were sweating, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He felt like the same terrified man who had walked into O'Malley's 3 years ago to detonate his friend's life. He found Ethan in a small, cluttered office, hunched over a set of plans for a low-income housing project. He had a beard now, and there were faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but he looked centered. The slick, corporate ambition was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. He looked up when Liam appeared in the doorway, and his face registered a series of conflicting emotions: surprise, anger, pain, and something else. Something that looked like weary resignation. "Liam," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the old warmth. "Ethan," Liam said, his own voice barely a whisper. Can we talk?" Ethan stared at him for a long moment, a silent battle raging in his eyes. Finally, he sighed and gestured to the worn-out chair opposite his desk. "I guess you're not going to leave until you do." Liam sat down. The silence in the small office was heavy, suffocating. He didn't know where to begin. "I'm sorry," felt too small, too inadequate for the chasm between them. "I saw your mom a while back," Liam started, his voice rough. "She said you were working here, doing this." He gestured around the office. "It's good work, Ethan." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, a defensive posture. Don't come here and try to make small talk. If you have something to say, say it." Liam took a deep breath. "I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I don't think I have the right. I know I hurt you more than anyone has a right to hurt another person, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that I did it because I love you, because you are my brother, and I couldn't stand by and watch you build your life on a lie." The words came out in a torrent, raw and unrehearsed. "I miss you. Every single day, I miss my friend." Tears welled in his eyes, and he didn't bother to hide them. He had no defenses left. Ethan's hard expression began to soften, the anger in his eyes slowly dissolving into a deep, profound sadness. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Liam. "Do you have any idea what that was like?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To have your whole world, everything you believed in, everything you were working towards, just obliterated in a single conversation by the one person on earth I thought I could trust unconditionally." "I know," Liam whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I hated you," Ethan said, the words stark and honest. "I hated you with every part of me. I told myself you were a jealous, backstabbing snake. I told myself you wanted her. It was easier than admitting the truth. What's the truth? Liam asked softly. Ethan let out a long, shuddering breath. The truth is that you were right. The truth is, on some level, I think I knew. I knew she was distant. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to see it. I was so caught up in my plan, in the life I was supposed to have, that I ignored all the signs. She was a beautiful part of the picture, and I refused to believe she didn't want to be in it. He shook his head, a look of self-recrimination on his face. She tried to talk to me a few times, but I just steamroll her with my own enthusiasm, my own certainty. I never really listened. You were the only one who did. He finally looked Liam directly in the eye. You were a better friend to me than I was to her. You told me the truth, even when it was the hardest thing in the world to do, and I crucified you for it. A single tear traced a path through his beard. It's taken me 3 years of being angry, of being lost, of trying to figure out who the hell I am without my precious plan, to finally understand that. What you did, it was an act of love, a brutal, horrible, necessary act of love. The dam broke. All the years of pain, of guilt, of loss, came pouring out. Liam choked back a sob. Ethan stood up, came around the desk, and pulled his friend into a hug. They stood there for a long time, two brothers, two survivors, holding each other up amidst the wreckage of their shared past. It wasn't a magic fix. The scars were still there. The hurt was still real. But it was a start. It was a foundation. They talked for hours, catching up on the 3 years of lost time. Ethan spoke of his journey, of hitting rock bottom and slowly finding a new sense of purpose in his work, helping people who had nothing. For the first time, Liam saw a humility in his friend that had never been there before. The old arrogance had been burned away, leaving something stronger and more authentic in its place. Finally, Liam knew he had to tell him the last piece of the story. His stomach twisted in knots. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice tense. It's about Chloe. Ethan's posture stiffened slightly. Is she okay? She's more than okay. She's incredible. She has a studio in Port Blossom at the old cannery project. Ethan processed this, his expression unreadable. She's back in Port Blossom? Yes, Liam said, bracing himself. And she and I are together. He watched Ethan's face, prepared for the anger, the accusation, the return of the old hatred. Instead, Ethan was quiet for a long time. He looked out the window at the gray Portland sky, his jaw working. When he finally turned back, his eyes were clear and held a surprising sadness, but not anger. I'm not surprised, he said quietly. I think, on some level, I always knew you understood her in a way I never could. Back then, it made me angry and jealous. Now, he shrugged, a gesture of acceptance. Now, I just hope you're both happy. You both deserve it. God knows you've earned it. He managed a small, sad smile. Just, do me a favor. Build her a better house than you were going to build for me. Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for 3 years. The weight that had been sitting on his chest for so long finally, completely, lifted. When he drove back to Port Blossom that evening, the world looked different. The colors were brighter, the air was cleaner. He felt whole for the first time in years. He walked into his house, their house, and found Chloe in the living room, sketching in a notebook, bathed in the warm glow of a lamp. She looked up, a question in her eyes. He didn't have to say a word. She saw it on his face. She stood up, and he walked into her arms, burying his face in her hair. It's okay, he whispered. It's all okay. They stood there, holding each other, the quiet rhythm of their breathing, a testament to the life they had so carefully built together. Later that night, they walked out to his workshop. He turned on the lights, illuminating the new model that sat on his work table. It wasn't a grand cliffside statement. It was a smaller house, nestled in a grove of trees, with a large, light-filled studio on one side and a cozy workshop on the other. It was a house designed for two lives, intertwined but independent. A house built not on a plan, but on a deep, quiet understanding. An honest house. Chloe ran her hand over the miniature roof, just as she had done with the other model, all those years ago. But this time, her eyes weren't filled with panic. They were shining with tears of a different kind. "It's perfect," she whispered. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They looked at the model together, a blueprint for a future that was finally, truly theirs. Outside, the sound of the Pacific was a gentle, rhythmic shush, a peaceful sigh. The storm was over. The calm was here to stay. Sometimes, the most beautiful structures are built from the ruins of what came before.